Welcome to Beyond the Game. My name is Silva, and if you're anything like me, you've found the lore of video games just as interesting as the game itself. Today we will be exploring the history of the Fallout franchise leading up to the Great War of 2077. If you've ever played a Fallout game, you'll already know that the world is set in a post-apocalyptic retro future, and a surprisingly immersive one at that. The games themselves have been produced by a few different developers throughout the years, beginning with Black Isle Studios in 1997 and eventually landing in the laps of Bethesda Softworks. As of current, there are 4 main games and 4 spin-offs, with Fallout 76 slated for late 2018. The stories of Fallout take place across the United States, in an alternate timeline which diverges from ours shortly after World War II. It is generally believed that the science fiction anthology Worlds of Tomorrow heavily influenced this representation of the world. In the Fallout world, the transistor was never invented by the American physicists John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley. Without the transistor's revolutionary technology, which allowed for the miniaturization of electronics, science was left with vacuum tubes and eventually progressed to harness atomic physics in its technological advances. This results in clunky, cumbersome electronics and supercomputers, which you will encounter in the game and theoretically locks the United States into a cultural stasis of the atomic age. However, this does not halt the progress of science, and a variety of nuclear-powered advanced robotics is developed, including vehicles, weapons, and automatons. Around the year 1969, the United States consolidate their 50 states into 13 commonwealths in order to mitigate the influence of communism as the 1950s Cold War paranoia set in, leading to the country spiraling into a fascist police state centered around plutocracy instead of democracy. The United States federal government would ultimately become Enclave, whom I'm sure you've encountered if you've ever played a Fallout game, and anyone who spoke out against them in this new capitalist country was executed without ceremony. Jump to the 21st century. Although it's not explained how, we're happy to see that both racial segregation has ended and civil rights for women have still progressed as they did in our world. In 2052, as oil reserves in the Middle East begin to run dry, the Middle Eastern nations rapidly raise the oil prices, which causes the collapse of many smaller countries. This leads to what we know as the Resource Wars, where the European Commonwealth respond to the rising cost with military force. Although the United Nations attempted to intervene, they were unsuccessful, and this crushing inability to act caused many of its member nations to withdraw and the UN to ultimately be dissolved. Meanwhile, the United States was being supplied with oil from the Texas Commonwealth and Mexico, and didn't feel the impact from this resource war at first. However, when the Texas oil fields ran dry around the same time the war was raging across the pond, the United States faced an energy crisis. In 2053, the new plague, also known as the Blue Flu, swept the United States, causing an approximate 200,000 deaths and prompting the closure of international borders. The conflict in the Middle East escalates as a nuclear attack destroys the Israeli city of Tel Aviv, setting off a domino effect of nuclear strikes throughout the warring nations in Europe and the Middle East. With nuclear fears gripping Americans, the government commissions Project Safe House, also known as the Societal Preservation Program, leading to the creation of 122 vaults across the United States. The Vault-Tec Corporation, with the collaboration of Robco Industries, constructed the first vault beneath Los Angeles as a demonstration for this technology. This demonstration vault was not part of the intended experiments for Project Safe House, which was later discovered to be a series of secret experiments orchestrated by the United States government on the inhabitants of each vault. By 2063, most of the vaults had finished construction, with only a handful of exceptions such as Vault 13, Vault 76, 88, 112, 114, and 118. Vault 112 was the last finished construction in 2074. I'll explain each of these vaults and what their known experiments were in a later episode. By 2059, oil reserves were growing scarce, and the United States increased its military presence in Alaska to secure their remaining oil reserves in that state. As American military insists on having their troops stationed on Canadian soil to ensure the safety of the Alaskan pipeline, the relationship between the two countries grows strained. By 2060, the era of petroleum products ends with the Middle East's oil reserves running completely dry, marking the end of the 8-year war between the European Commonwealth and the Middle East. With no common enemy to unite them, the European Commonwealth began to dissolve and a civil war broke out among its member countries over what little remaining resources they had. Without a wealth of oil, the use of gasoline-powered vehicles comes to a halt across the globe, only to be replaced by extraordinarily expensive alternatives powered by electricity and fusion. China, exhausting their own oil reserves and fearing their country is on the verge of collapse, invades Alaska in 2066, triggering an all-out war at the Alaskan frontline. Strong-arming control of the Canadian soil and resources, the United States military progressed across Canada to enforce its borders at the American frontline, leading to Canadian protests and for the country to eventually be dubbed Little America by most. Known as the Sino-American War, the Enclave officially takes action by implementing the use of T-54D power armor suits in combat defending the Alaskan frontline. These suits are an iconic image for the Fallout franchise as a whole, and later used as a standard-issued uniform for the Brotherhood of Steel. While the use of power armor proved successful against the Chinese forces, it doesn't completely dislodge their forces from the area. In retaliation for increasing demands on Canada's resources, they attempt to sabotage the Alaskan pipeline in 2072 but fail. This prompts America to officially annex Canada, and that annexation is complete by 2076. Facing Chinese forces on their own soil, soldiers outfitted with T-51B power armor cut a swath through the Chinese territory. Alaska was reclaimed by its government in 2077, however, the two countries had not yet come to a truce. Although it is scarcely known, West Tech is discovered to be testing military prisoners with a new and powerful biological agent known as the forced evolutionary virus around this time. This virus mutates its victims in bizarre ways, and although the scientists responsible are ordered to be executed, this doesn't mark the end of the FEV. With the population of the United States reaching 400 billion people, they would need nearly 400,000 vaults to accommodate everyone. However, the government only commissioned 112 vaults. It's later revealed that the government and Vault-Tec never truly believed the war would end in a full-blown nuclear holocaust, and instead used the excuse to dedicate these vaults to scientific and sociological experimentation. The Enclave and the President of the United States at the time chose to take control of vast oil fields below the Pacific Ocean, fortifying the offshore Poseidon oil rig to use as their base from which to continue the government and repopulate the country after the radiation subsides. They continued to advance their own technology and armaments at this location well into the 23rd century. Robert House, the founder of Robco Industries, foresees the imminent threat of nuclear war and places himself in stasis. The American public, however, having been conditioned by far too many false alarms up until that point, largely ignore the warning sirens when the bombs begin to fall. This results in many vaults being underpopulated when the doors shut. On October 23, 2077, the world as everyone knew it came to an end. Although there is no documented confirmation on who struck first, nearly every nuclear-armed nation launched their warheads, and missiles rained down from the sky. This event became known as the Great War, what felt like the end of human civilization, with the fall of entire nations and the descent into a nuclear dark age. It was the beginning of the post-apocalyptic world to the franchise which we all know and love today. In the next episode, we'll continue with the history which took place after the Great War. And now I have a question for you. Who is your favorite character from the Fallout franchise, and why? Leave your answer in the comments below. Thank you for watching Beyond the Game. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as well as click that little bell icon so you're notified of new videos. It really helps me out and it lets me know that you appreciate my work. I look forward to you joining me on the next episode. Bye!